Alright, so the next step in this process is that we are going to drop down an attribute delete. Just make sure we're going to delete any attributes that we no longer need, so total burn, etc, etc. Making sure everything's where it needs to be. Cool. So now the next part of this is that we're going to drop down another pyro spreading fire, because this is going to eat away the bottom of our face, and that's what we need to do next before we do any of the other effects. So I'm just going to delete anything I don't need, which includes this. And from here, once again, I'm just going to scatter some points. And from here, I'm also going to, create a hot group, select in this, generally the same area where I want the face to start being eaten from. So enter. Simulate spread. So now the goal here is that we want this to be a little bit slower than the boils going across our face. What we need to do is just make sure the timing's correct, so at like frame 123 the growth of the boils and the skin deformation should surpass the area that's being eaten away, so we see a mix of both. And so I'll kind of just show you how to do that. So I'm just gonna choose a random frame because it's taken a little bit longer than I'd like. And we're once again, going to transfer this attribute back on to our character. And we actually should probably say, around frame 1, because we do have an animated asset. We need to time shift this to frame 1 and say start. Just double check that our hot group is where it needs to be, and unfortunately it's changed, so I'm going to reselect it, hit enter, go to our simulate spread, and go over here. So now I'm going to go over here to frame 48, and we have to resimulate our source spread again. So we'll wait a couple seconds for this to work. Alright, so we've got now back to transferring our attributes, and where is our total burn? It's right here. It's actually surpassing our deformation quite a bit, so I'm actually going to slow down the rate of which everything starts to get eaten. So we're going to slow that down a little bit. Now I'm going to just turn off my noise here, and I'm noticing we're missing some facial deformations. Like we should see a big giant spread along the cheeks here, I think. Or underneath the jaw. So I'm just going to go through my nodes here to see what's happening, because we do have some deformation in the face here that I can't really see, and then up here I feel like there's more of it. So I'm going to go up to my point deform right under where it says blast null here, and I'm just going to make some adjustments to how the point deform is handling and capturing my mesh. See, sometimes if you have a really small object, you need to lower the minimum amount of points, otherwise you're gonna it's just not gonna work successfully sometimes. So that is good, and now we might have to recache everything, but that's okay. So we're gonna do that again. So I'm gonna recache my pops, and then I'm also gonna go down here where it says skin and recache that as well. Alright, so now I'm going to recache my skin, and this will hopefully work this time, countering in our wonderful deformations of the face as well. Alrighty, so now that we have our skin here, you can see that we've got some growths coming up like on our face as this is going up the face, which is starting to look really disgusting. So I'm enjoying this. This is really cool. So let's go back down over here. I'm going to just let this play back again. And now that we have our simulate spread on here, I'm going to go to total burn. I feel like if we go up here to frame 58, this is how it should look. And this is on frame 1. So yeah, let's go with this. So now we're going to once again go to our point deform, and we're going to put this in here. We're going to put this in there, and we're going to put this in there. I'm going to once again lower my point deform so we get the wrinkles back in. And I'm going to turn off my visualizer for total burn. And now I'm going to add a blast node. So the blast node is going to eat away sections of the face that I want the skin to disappear at. So we're going to go at total burn. We should also specify up here that we're going to use total burn. So yeah, that helps. So we are going to try and get rid of total burn. So total burn, why aren't you transferring over? It's there. And, there we go. We had to put this onto points. So that's the section that we want to delete. And we also want to add an add node, so you can see some rando points that are disconnected from the mesh. And if those appear, we need to delete them because they are unused points. So now that we have that, we've successfully made our mesh. And this is going to be our base mesh of our face. And I also like to just put another file cache here as well, because point deforms can get super heavy and I just don't like resimulating them sometimes. So we're gonna call this base mesh, and I'm gonna save the disk in background, and that is going to save out. Now the fun part can begin. So I'm gonna go to frame 1 here. We're gonna wait for this to cook out. As we wait for it to cook out, I'm also gonna take the liberty in deleting any attributes that we no longer need. So that would be total burn if it exists. So we're gonna get rid of that. So now the next stage is to we kind of have to tell Houdini, like, there's gonna be blood around the edges of the skin too, right? So we need to create a group edge, or a group for our edges that we can form a mesh around. So I'm gonna do a group here, go $OS, and I'm going to turn off my base group, call this edges, include by edges, and go to unshared edges, and that should group my edges like that. Perfecto. So now that we have that edge group, we're now going to use that edge group to make almost like blood boils that go all the way around it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to resample. I'm going to check this, and I'm going to go resample. And you can see like there's very unrefined points here. And so I'm going to use a resample only on my, not color group. Give me a second. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to use a convert line instead. I missed one step. So we're going to use a convert line. All right, thank you. Convert line. And we are going to say to it, like, grab the edge group, please, and use that. So now you can see only the edges in that edge group are converted to a line, and there's a bunch of disconnected points. So we're going to use an add node to get rid of the points that are disconnected, like this. And then we're going to use a resample to basically resample this line and resample it until we can get a line that can, it's like got enough like points on it where we can actually use these points to kind of create a blood-like mesh along those lines. Now the next fun part about this is that we have to use something called VDB from particles. So as you might see here, VDB from polygons makes your points really, really big. So the first thing we need to do is actually lower our minimal radius in voxels to something super, super small. And also our point radius scale. So something like that's manageable, that's less than 0.1, something like that. But then we also lose our voxel resolution, so we have to lower that as well. And as you can see, we get some really chunky boys. And if I was to kind of ghost my mesh here, so I'm going to ghost it and then show my chunky boy, he is kind of too big. And it's overall like a very consistent kind of buildup on this thing. So that's not something that I want. If skin is peeling back, the blood size is not going to be that consistent. So what I want to do right now is I want to drop down something called attribute randomize. And attribute randomize, we can use that to create something called p-scale. And that's going to randomize p-scale. And basically the VD from particles actually does recognize the p-scale attribute. So you can use it as much as you like to kind of create an almost randomized sense of scale for these particles. I'm gonna make sure they're not entirely too small. So we don't want them too high res because then it's not gonna look like blood anymore. But then the next thing we want to do is use a VDB smooth, which is gonna smooth everything out, which may or may not work for us. And we are then going to convert this to polygons. And that's how we can create some blood buildup on the skin. Now, this is really easy. We just drop down some color. So I'm going to give this... I like putting my color kind of at the end so I can adjust it later on without going through too many nodes. So I'm going to make this like a darker red color. And I'm going to put a file cache above it. I like putting my file caches above my color stops at the end of my node tree because then it doesn't I don't have to go above the file cache, change the color, then recache. It's just more accessible for me to do it that way. So I'm going to call this blood clots. I'm going to save it. And while that's saving, we're just going to add a little null. We're going to call this out. Blood skin clots. Perfect. So now the fun part begins. We're going to jump up here while that's cooking out, and we're going to turn off our head build. The next thing we're going to do is add a geo node, and we're going to call this our base mesh. And this one over here, we're going to create another one and call this blood skin clots. And basically just bring them into here because those are our two kind of finished ones. So we want base mesh. And for the skin clots, we just want to bring in another object merge and bring in our out skin clots. Those might take a while to cook out because you are working with VDBs, but this is what you should have so far. Some sort of skin getting eaten away and a growth pattern going over it. Some boils starting to erupt on the skin. So we're going to keep that on as a reference as we move around the scene. I'm also going to at this stage kind of start grouping everything together. So I know this is going to be my clots. So we're going to call this skin clots. So, and then up here we have like the whole meshing process. So I'm going to call this part down here skin eating because that's basically the section where we eat the skin. And then over here, I also, before we go up the node tree even more, I'm just going to bring out my color palette and I'm just going to color my outputs just so I know where they are, and if I want to reference them again, I can. So I'm just going to do that. And now I'm going to go up to the top of my node tree and say, okay, this is the, the remeshed head. So. And then over here is set groups. So this is where we build all of our groups. So build groups. And then from here, I'm just going to delete this attribute delete that I don't need anymore. And this is where we kind of decided our groups were kind of done. We kind of did some like skin dense. So I'll just label this skin dense. And then over here finally was when we were kind of adding our age attribute and finally kind of outputting all the skin deformations in total. So I'll just group this together and we'll say skin boils because that's basically what this section does. So now that that is all labeled, let's continue to add more elements to this head. So if our skin's getting eaten, we probably want to have blood dripping down away from the skin that's getting eaten. So I'm going to go over here where our resample is, and I'm going to add a little null, because this is, we're going to borrow this, and we're going to build something off over here. So I'm going to drop down a point velocity. Point velocity is like one of my favorite SOPs in Houdini. It's so useful. I remember way back in the day when this tool did not exist and you just had to wing it and code your own velocity into things. It wasn't really fun. But now we have something that makes velocity for us. So I'm going to do add velocity. I'm going to give it some down attributes and we can visualize our velocity with set to value. We're going to do something like that. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to go to our pop network and we're going to generate some points that are going to fall from this wound opening up. So we do have velocity coming in. We may not need gravity, but I'm going to add it anyways. I'm also going to add a ground plane because I think that's going to be good to have as we have the blood splatter continuously touch down. So we're going to just do this because you don't want to assimilate particles into infinity. We're going to go back up to our source input, all points, and see how this goes. So now they're super bouncy. You can see that it is going up, but we have some bouncy particles that we need to fix. So we're going to go to pop object, physical, turn that all down. Physical, boom, boom, boom. And now we have some cool things happening. Now we probably need to give it some noise. Like it's going right through our object, which is unfortunately happening. So we might have to go over here to where it says interpolate source back. That might help our situation. Let's make sure it's not going through the ground. It is still going through the ground. So let's go to inherit velocity, cut that in half. Okay, that's working. That's improving things. Let's also go over here to negative. So see if that interpolates the source better or worse. That looks better. Perfect. So now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to switch from all points to points. And I'm going to just increase the number of points that I'm emitting per frame. And I'm also going to add some noise because we don't want this to fall straight down. We want it to actually have some natural kind of noise to it. So this is hopefully going to add that in. So we have some splatter happening, which is cool. We do have some interesting straight lines that are happening. And that could be due to a numerous amount of things, probably the velocity and also the shape that we're emitting from. So I'm going to increase this and just give this more turbulence to try and break that up. So now we have this overall growth effect. Now, I think also part of the issue we have our emitter kind of intersecting with our ground geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push my ground geometry just a little bit downwards. Cool. So now we have some cool action happening. I think I might, we're also having some straight line movements as well, so I'm gonna switch this back to positive. Let's go back to negative, forward, and see if we can still get some movements that are not as bad. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, just add a little bit more noise in here. And now, I'm just going to delete any attributes we don't need because we don't want Houdini to overthink things. And so the only thing we really need is velocity, so I'm going to keep that. And now I'm going to go to particle. And I'm just going to play with my particle separation. And I'm gonna probably play with my droplet scale because this is on a smaller object. And even though we want resolution, we don't want like ickiness. So that looks pretty good. Getting there for blood is a little bit low res. Some polygon issues. So I'm gonna just increase this ever so slightly, which might help. And voxel size, which also might help. Cool. We've got some nice low-res blood. Now the fun part begins and we get to cache this out. I like to do 2 different file caches, one for my particles and one for the actual mesh itself. I find this speeds things up quite a bit. So I'm going to call this particles blood. And I'm going to drop down, color because we got to color this red to symbolize that is actually blood. And for consistency, I'm actually just going to use the same color swap over here and copy and paste it. So delete that, copy this, and we're going to put a null there that we're going to say out blood for. And I'm also going to add another file cache here. We're going to call this blood remesh. While we're waiting for everything to cache out and move on to our second cache, I'm going to go up here, okay, out blood pour, and reference that. So we can also see it on the surface here. So we're going to call this blood pour. We'll grab the blood pour. So that will be brought into the surface. We'll be able to see it. And I'm just also going to rope this off like that and label it blood pour. While I'm doing that, I'm going to cache this out to disk. Blood pour. And now we should get some hopefully really cool shapes, and this is like the first 3 objects that we've kind of built for this.